He shoved my graduation cake off the table. It hit the concrete with a wet smack, frosting exploding everywhere, and my 10-year-old nephew Liam stood there grinning like he'd just won a prize. "Eat it off the ground," he shouted, pointing at me while the entire backyard erupted in laughter. Not awkward laughter. Not uncomfortable, "oh no, that went too far" laughter. Real, genuine, belly-deep laughter from every single member of my family. My mother was wiping tears from her eyes. My sister Amanda had her phone out recording it, already thinking about which group chat would get this gem first. Uncle Rick was slapping his knee. Aunt Becky's shoulders shook as she tried to cover her mouth. Even my dad, who never laughed at anything, had this satisfied smirk on his face. I stood there holding a cake knife, watching purple frosting spell out "Congrats, Daisy" smear across the patio, and something inside me just stopped. Not broke. Stopped. Like a machine that finally realized it was working for free. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I'd driven 4 hours from Seattle that morning. Left at 6 a.m. because Mom texted 3 times reminding me not to be late. I wore the dress Amanda once said made me look almost pretty. I brought a gift for Liam. I practiced what I'd say if anyone asked about my biomedical engineering degree, about graduating summa cum laude, about the 4 years I'd spent working full-time while taking night classes. But no one asked. Not one person. When I walked through the gate at noon, Amanda was describing her Cabo vacation to an audience of 15 people hanging on her every word. My graduation cake sat at the edge of the dessert table, shoved aside to make room for the tres leches cake she'd brought back from Mexico. No one had cut mine. No one mentioned it. Mom called out, "You're finally here," but didn't get up. Just pointed to an empty chair at the far end where the sun was hitting hardest. I sat down and became invisible. 30 minutes passed. Amanda showed photos. Everyone leaned in. When I tried to look, my cousin Sarah physically blocked me with her body. I mentioned finishing my finals. Mom said, "That's nice, honey," in that voice that means she wasn't listening, then immediately asked Amanda about resort breakfast options. Then Liam walked up to me. "Aunt Daisy, Mom says you're the boring one." Loud enough for everyone to hear. They laughed then too. I smiled. Stayed quiet. Like I always did. But then he went for the cake, and I watched it happen in slow motion, my brain screaming at my body to move but nothing working fast enough. And now here we were. Cake on the ground. Family howling with laughter. Me standing there realizing that love isn't supposed to sound like this. I set the knife down, picked up my purse, and walked toward the gate. "Daisy, where are you going?" Mom called out, still laughing, like I was being dramatic over nothing. I didn't answer. Didn't turn around. Didn't explain. Just kept walking while they laughed harder, probably at how sensitive I was being, how I couldn't take a joke, classic Daisy ruining the fun. I got in my car and drove. For hours back to Seattle in complete silence, too numb to cry, too clear-headed to doubt what I'd just seen. I got home around 9 p.m., collapsed on my couch in the dark, and that's when my phone buzzed. "Mom," in the family group chat. "We've chosen to sever all contact with you." The message said, "Your negativity is toxic to this family. Stay away from us forever." I watched Amanda's name pop up underneath with a heart reaction. A thumbs up. Public approval of my exile. And instead of feeling hurt, instead of that desperate need to apologize and fix it and make myself smaller so they'd love me again, I felt something else. Clarity. I opened my banking app. The app I'd been avoiding for months because I knew what was there and didn't want to face it. But I was facing it now. There it was. First of every month, like clockwork. Mortgage payment for my parents' house. $1,500. Car payment for Amanda's SUV. $450. All coming out of my account. All in my name. All from documents I'd signed 3 years ago when they said they needed help, just temporarily, while Dad's business recovered. 37 months later, temporary was still going strong. I did the math. Nearly $70,000. My money. While I lived in a studio apartment and ate ramen and told myself I was being responsible, being a good daughter, helping family like you're supposed to. They kept their house. Amanda drove a luxury SUV. And I paid for it while they laughed at cake smeared across concrete. I opened the group chat and typed one sentence. "I'm removing my name from every loan tomorrow." Sent. Phone face down on the coffee table. And then I sat in the dark and waited. Because I knew what was coming. I knew that within hours, maybe minutes, that group chat was going to explode. I knew the missed calls would start stacking up. I knew the guilt trips and the accusations and the "how could you do this to family" messages would flood in. But here's what they didn't know. Here's what they'd never understood about quiet, boring, sensitive Daisy, who always smiled and stayed silent and paid their bills without complaint. I'd been keeping track. Every payment. Every date. Every email where they promised it was temporary. Every text where Mom said, "You're such a blessing," while my account drained. Every conversation where Amanda bragged about her vacation while I calculated if I could afford groceries that week. I had records. I had documentation. I had 3 years of evidence that I'd been their personal ATM machine while they treated me like a punchline. And tomorrow morning, I had an appointment at the bank with Mr. Diaz, who'd already reviewed my case and confirmed I could legally remove myself from every single loan. They thought kicking me out of the family was punishment. They thought I'd come crawling back, apologizing, begging to be let back into their good graces. They didn't realize they'd just set me free. My phone started buzzing. One notification. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. The group chat was waking up. I let it buzz. Let them panic. Let them realize what they'd done. Because I'd spent 28 years being the good daughter, the responsible one, the boring one who paid the bills and took the jokes and smiled through the humiliation. And I was done. Tomorrow, I'd sign papers. I'd cut every legal tie. I'd stop paying for people who laughed when my cake hit the floor. Tonight, I sat in the dark and felt lighter than I had in years. This was the beginning. Not the end. The beginning. The next morning, I woke up to 47 missed calls. The group chat had exploded with over 200 messages, and my phone was physically hot from the constant notifications buzzing through. I didn't open a single message. Didn't listen to a single voicemail. I got up, showered, made coffee, and got dressed like this was any other Tuesday. Except it wasn't. This was the Tuesday I stopped being their ATM machine. I had an appointment at First National Bank at 9 a.m., and I arrived 5 minutes early. Mr. Diaz was already waiting in his office, a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and kind eyes that didn't judge. He'd reviewed everything I'd sent over the weekend, all the loan documents and payment histories I'd been quietly collecting for months without really knowing why. Now I knew why. "Ms. Wilson, I've gone through all 3 loans," he said, gesturing to the papers spread across his desk. "You're listed as primary cosigner on the mortgage, the vehicle loan, and a personal loan I'm guessing you forgot about." I had forgotten about that third one. My father had called 2 years ago, desperate, needing money for some business opportunity that never materialized. $20,000 with my name guaranteeing it. The paperwork took less than 30 minutes. Mr. Diaz explained that as cosigner, I had every legal right to remove myself, especially given that I'd been making 90% of the payments for 37 consecutive months. The bank would notify the primary borrowers within 24 hours, and they'd have 72 hours to refinance without my name or face default. Each signature felt like freedom. Each initial was a severed chain. The mortgage that kept my parents in their 4-bedroom house while I lived in a studio apartment. Amanda's luxury SUV that cost more per month than my rent. Dad's failed business loan that I'd been quietly covering while he told everyone at family gatherings that he was self-made. My hand didn't shake once. When I walked out of that bank at 9:45 a.m., the Seattle sky was gray and drizzling, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight that had been pressing on my chest since I was old enough to understand that love in my family came with invoices attached was finally lifting. My phone was still having a meltdown in my purse. I sat in my car in the parking lot and finally looked at the messages. The guilt trips were predictable. Mom asking how I could do this to them, Uncle Rick calling me selfish, Aunt Becky saying family forgives so why couldn't I, Cousin Sarah insisting they were, just laughing, and I was being too sensitive like always. But it was Amanda's message that made something hot and sharp twist in my chest. She'd written that I owed them everything, that they'd raised me and fed me and clothed me, that my little degree didn't make me better than them, that I'd be nothing without this family. I typed one message to the entire group chat and hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response was simple. I'd paid $68,000 toward loans that weren't mine while they laughed at cake smeared on concrete. I didn't owe them anything anymore. I was done. Then I muted the entire conversation and drove to work. At the lab, My colleague Jennifer noticed something different about me immediately. She said I seemed lighter, and I realized I was actually smiling without forcing it. For 8 hours, I lost myself in cell cultures and data analysis and forgot that my entire family was probably combusting in real time. That evening, I did something radical. I ordered Thai food from the expensive place downtown, the one with the good curry that cost $23 for a single entree. For 3 years, I'd been living on dollar menu items and ramen, telling myself I was being responsible while my bank account drained into my family's pockets every month. I sat on my couch eating pad thai straight from the container, watching Netflix and feeling that constant knot of anxiety in my stomach finally start to unravel. One call came through from an unknown number that night. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Dad, calling from someone else's phone because I'd stopped answering his number days ago. His voice sounded tired and defeated in a way I'd never heard before. He said they needed to talk about this, that I was going to ruin them, that they'd lose the house and Amanda's car and everything. I told him the paperwork was already submitted. It was done. There was long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then he said something that should have broken my heart but instead just made me angry. He said it was just a joke. I told him no, it wasn't a joke. It was a pattern that had been going on my entire life, and I wasn't part of it anymore. I hung up, blocked that number too, and went back to my curry. The bank would send official notices the next day, 24 hours exactly from when I'd signed those papers. That's when my family would realize this wasn't an empty threat or an emotional outburst they could guilt me out of. This was legal, binding, and irreversible. I'd cut every financial tie, severed every obligation. And for the first time in 28 years, I'd chosen myself over them. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No anxiety dreams about missed payments. No nightmares about disappointing people who were never going to be proud of me anyway. Just deep, dreamless sleep. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying weight that was never yours to carry in the first place. The next afternoon, the bank sent the notices. And that's when my family realized I wasn't coming back. They showed up at my apartment 3 days later. I was making dinner, just simple pasta and vegetables, listening to music and actually enjoying my Friday evening for the first time in forever when the pounding started. Not knocking. Pounding. Like someone was trying to break through the door with their fists. I looked through the peephole and saw them. Mom, Amanda, and surprisingly, Dad, who never got involved in confrontations. Mom's face was red and twisted with rage. Amanda was already filming on her phone, probably planning to post this as evidence of my cruelty. I didn't open the door. Instead, I pulled out my own phone and started recording. Daisy, open this door right now. Mom screamed, her voice shrill enough that I knew my neighbors could hear. We need to talk about what you've done. You've destroyed this family. Amanda shouted, banging harder. The bank is taking everything. Mom and Dad are losing their house because of you. I stood on the other side of the door, phone recording their voices, their threats, every word. They screamed for 10 minutes straight. Called me ungrateful, selfish, heartless, evil. Said I was throwing away the people who raised me over nothing, over being too sensitive, over a stupid cake. Dad's voice was quieter, but somehow worse. He said I'd always been a difficult child, always wanting attention, always making everything about me. That this was just another cry for help, and if I just opened the door, we could fix this as a family. I didn't say a word. Didn't engage. Just kept recording. Then I called 911. The operator answered and I spoke calmly, clearly, stating my address and explaining that 3 people were at my door refusing to leave after being asked, that they were making threats and causing a disturbance. The operator said police were on the way. It took 12 minutes for the patrol car to arrive. I watched through the peephole as Mom's expression changed from rage to shock when she saw the flashing lights. The officer was a woman, probably in her early 30s, and she looked tired in that way that said she'd seen this exact scenario play out 100 times before. I opened the door once the officer was there as a buffer between us. These people are my family, I said calmly. I asked them to leave multiple times by a text before they arrived. They refused. They've been banging on my door and yelling threats for over 10 minutes. I have it all recorded. Mom's face crumpled. She tried to explain to the officer that I'd stolen from them, that I'd abandoned them in their time of need, that she was just a mother trying to reach her daughter. Amanda showed the officer her phone, Probably some edited version of events that made me look like the villain. The officer looked at me, asked if I wanted to press charges for trespassing and harassment. I hesitated. This was my mother, my sister, my father standing there looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. But then I remembered the cake on the ground, the laughter, the 3 years of payments, the text message telling me to stay away forever, right up until the moment they needed my money again. I want them escorted off the property, I said. And I want a record of this incident in case they come back. The officer nodded and asked them to leave. Mom started crying, those dramatic sobs she'd always been good at, the ones that usually made me crumble and apologize for existing. Amanda argued, said this was ridiculous, said the police should be arresting me for theft. Dad just looked at me with something like disappointment, like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. They left. The officer gave me her card and told me to call if they returned. I thanked her, went back inside, and saved the recording with the title, Boundaries, and the date. Then I sat down and finally let myself shake. The adrenaline was wearing off and reality was setting in. I just had my own family escorted away by police. This was real. This was permanent. There was no going back from this. 2 days later, Mom posted on Facebook. It was long, dramatic, dripping with martyrdom. She wrote about how she'd raised an ungrateful daughter who'd turned her back on family, who'd stolen money and destroyed their lives, who'd manipulated banks and police to paint herself as the victim when really she was the abuser. She tagged me, tagged my workplace, tagged mutual friends and distant relatives, painted herself as the suffering mother and me as the sociopathic daughter who'd abandoned her family in their darkest hour. I didn't respond, didn't defend myself, didn't post my own version of events. I simply sent a private message to my supervisor at the lab with a brief, professional explanation. Family dispute over financial boundaries, no impact on my work, documenting in case it escalates. My supervisor, Dr. Chen, was a woman in her 60s who'd immigrated from Taiwan and built her career from nothing. She read my message, called me into her office, and said 4 words that made me want to cry. I believe you. Documented. That was it. No drama. No interrogation. Just belief and protection. Within 48 hours, Mom's post disappeared. I don't know if Facebook removed it or if she deleted it herself, but it vanished. Maybe someone pointed out that publicly accusing someone of theft without evidence was dangerous. Maybe she realized it wasn't getting the sympathy she expected. Either way, it was gone. The bank letter arrived the following week. Official, stamped, legal. It confirmed my complete removal from all 3 loans, effective immediately. I was no longer financially responsible for my parents' house, Amanda's SUV, or Dad's business loan. The borrowers had 30 days to refinance or face default proceedings. I held that letter in my hands and felt something shift inside my chest. Freedom. Actual, tangible, legal freedom. Life became quieter after that. Simpler. I worked, came home, cooked real meals, went to the gym, met up with friends I'd been neglecting for years because I was always too tired or too broke or too anxious. Jennifer from work invited me to her book club. I said yes. Started reading again, something I hadn't had energy for in years. I got promoted 3 months later. Not because of drama or sympathy, but because I'd been doing excellent work that was finally visible now that I wasn't drowning in family chaos and financial stress. Dr. Chen said my research on cellular regeneration was some of the best she'd seen in a decade. I moved to a better apartment. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom with actual sunlight and a kitchen that had a dishwasher. The rent was $800 more than my old place, but I could afford it now because I wasn't paying $2,000 a month to people who hated me. I bought plants, decorated, made it feel like home instead of just a place where I collapsed between shifts. 8 months after the cake incident, I got a message from Amanda. Just 2 words at first. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time. Didn't respond immediately. Didn't rush to forgive. Just sat with it. She sent another message an hour later, longer this time. She said she'd been thinking about everything, about how they'd treated me, about the loans and the cake and the laughter. She said she understood now why I'd left. She didn't make excuses, didn't ask for anything, just apologized. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the message without responding. Maybe someday I'd be ready to reply. Maybe someday I'd want to rebuild something with her. But not today. Today, I was still healing. Still learning how to live without the weight of their expectations and manipulations. Still discovering who Daisy Wilson was when she wasn't performing for an audience that would never applaud. I stood in my apartment with sunlight streaming through windows I actually had time to clean, plants thriving on the windowsill, research papers spread across a table I'd bought myself, and I whispered something I'd needed to hear for 28 years. Welcome home, Daisy. Not their home. Not the place where I was tolerated and used and laughed at. My home. The one I'd built from the ground up after walking away from people who confused obligation with love. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can choose. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public exposure. It's simply walking away and building a life so good, so peaceful, so entirely yours, that their chaos can't touch you anymore. I stopped paying for people who laughed when my cake hit the floor. And I started investing in the one person who'd been waiting patiently for me to notice her worth all along. Myself. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.